The golden calculation Valerie Chen's office overlooked San Francisco's financial district, a glass fortress from which she assessed the world in terms of data points and investment potential. At 34, she had built Prism Ventures into one of the most successful venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. Her secret? An algorithm she called the golden calculation, a complex formula that predicted human behavior with uncanny accuracy. People are predictable, she told the new analysts during orientation. Every decision comes down to optimization, maximizing reward while minimizing risk. Once you understand someone's values, you can predict their choices. Her colleague Richard Torres leaned against her doorframe, tablet in hand. The Callahan deal closed. Another prediction validated. Valerie smiled without looking up from her monitors. Their CFO had 3 kids in private school and a mortgage underwater. The moment we adjusted our offer to include accelerated vesting, it was inevitable. "You're scary sometimes, Val," Richard said. But his tone conveyed admiration. "Not everything can be reduced to numbers." "Everything important can," she replied, finally meeting his eyes. "Emotional decisions are just biological algorithms running on outdated hardware." Richard's phone chimed with a notification. "Speaking of unpredictable, remember that photography exhibit I mentioned? The one documenting glacier retreat in Patagonia? It's opening tonight. Come with me. Might be good for our green investment portfolio research." The gallery was housed in a converted warehouse in the Mission District. Unlike the sterile minimalism of Valerie's world, the space hummed with conversations and clinking glasses. The photographs dominated the walls, massive, haunting images of ice formations caught in various stages of collapse. The photographer turned down National Geographic, Richard whispered as they moved through the crowd, and apparently rejected a 7-figure corporate campaign from Petrochem Industries. Valerie raised an eyebrow. Nobody turns down that kind of money without an angle. Not everyone's motivated by profit maximization. Val. Before she could respond with her usual skepticism, the crowd parted, revealing a man in simple clothes, worn jeans and an untucked button-down with rolled sleeves. Despite his unassuming appearance, he commanded attention as he discussed his work with gallery visitors. "That's Ezra Williams," Richard said, former environmental scientist turned photojournalist. "His work has influenced climate policy in 3 countries. Valerie studied him with professional curiosity. Early 40s, confident posture animated when speaking about his work. No expensive watch, no designer clothes. Unusual for someone with obvious talent. When Ezra approached them, his handshake was firm. "Thanks for coming. You're from Prism Ventures, right? Richard mentioned you might attend." "Valerie Chen," she introduced herself. "Impressive work. Though I'm curious, is it true you declined a Petrochem contract?" Ezra's smile remained polite but cooled slightly. "I did. My work documents environmental degradation. Taking money from those causing it would compromise everything I stand for. Even at such a significant opportunity cost? Some things aren't negotiable," he replied simply. Integrity doesn't have a price tag. Something in his certainty triggered both irritation and fascination in Valerie. On the ride back to her penthouse, she couldn't stop analyzing the encounter. "People like that intrigue me," she told Richard. "They think they're above basic human incentive structures." Richard looked amused. "Maybe some people genuinely value principles over profit." "Everyone has a price," Valerie insisted. "It's just a matter of finding the right incentive. Care to wager on that?" Specifically on Ezra Williams? Valerie's competitive instinct flared. "Terms? If you can get him to take a corporate contract that contradicts his environmental stance within 2 months, I'll give you my shares in Blue Sky Tech. If you fail, you back my proposal for the new social impact fund. No questions asked." Valerie considered this. Richard's Blue Sky shares were worth millions, and she'd been opposing his wasteful social impact initiative for months. "Deal," she said, already formulating variables in her mental algorithm. Everyone has a price. Even Ezra Williams. What she couldn't calculate was how this equation would ultimately transform them both. The stubborn equation Valerie approached her wager with Richard like any other business project, methodically and with meticulous planning. She began by researching everything about Ezra Williams, his career trajectory, previous interviews, social connections, and financial status. His online presence was minimal but impactful, mostly documenting environmental causes and community projects. Subject demonstrates unusual resistance to traditional incentive structures, she dictated into her recorder while reviewing her findings. Approach requires customization. After a week of analysis, Valerie crafted her strategy. Rather than a direct offer, she would establish rapport first. She arranged to coincidentally encounter Ezra at a conservation fundraiser, where Prism Ventures was a sponsor. Your Glacier series has generated impressive traction, she said when she found him near a display of endangered species photographs. Have you considered expanding its reach? Ezra regarded her with a hint of wariness. Ms. Chen didn't expect to see you in conservation circles. Valerie, please. And you might be surprised what interests me beyond balance sheets. The lie came smoothly. I've been thinking about what you said about integrity having no price tag. And you're here to test that theory? His directness caught her off guard. She laughed softly. I'm here because your work makes people care about melting ice at the bottom of the world. That's valuable in ways both measurable and immeasurable. Something in her calculated sincerity must have registered, because Ezra's expression softened. I'm working on a new project documenting water scarcity in rural communities. Would you like to see some preliminary shots? This unexpected invitation became her opening. Over the next 3 weeks, Valerie orchestrated several casual meetings. She visited his modest studio in Oakland, asked thoughtful questions about his process, and even accompanied him on a local shoot documenting urban waste management. What she hadn't anticipated was finding his world genuinely interesting. Ezra moved through life with a certainty of purpose that both perplexed and fascinated her. Don't you ever worry about financial security? She asked him one afternoon as they reviewed his portfolio. I make enough to live and fund my projects, he answered. What would more money give me that I truly need? Richard was growing impatient. You're spending an awful lot of time researching your subject, he commented during their weekly meeting. No offer made yet? I'm establishing trust, Valerie defended. You can't rush behavioral economics. The truth was more complicated. She'd designed what should have been the perfect opportunity, a campaign for nature tech, a company developing water filtration systems. The job offered creative control, alignment with environmental values, and compensation 5 times his normal rate. When she finally presented it, Ezra's response was unexpected. This looks impressive on the surface, he said after reviewing the proposal, but NatureTech's parent company lobbies against water protection regulations. Their filtration systems are band-aids for problems they help create. Valerie was stunned. You research them. I research everyone who wants to use my work, Valerie, including you. His eyes held no accusation, just calm certainty. I'm curious why someone who quantifies everything cares so much about changing my mind. Valerie felt a strange hollowness. For the first time, her calculations had failed to predict a human variable. Worse, she was beginning to question whether she wanted to win this bet at all. Some things don't fit neatly into equations, she finally admitted. Echoing Richard's words without realizing it, Ezra smiled. That's the most authentic thing you've said since we met. Recalibrating values 2 days after their confrontation about nature tech, Valerie received a text message from Ezra. Documenting water access issues in Oakland's Elmwood district tomorrow. Come if you're interested in what I actually do. She told herself she was accepting his invitation solely to salvage her bet with Richard. Yet as dawn broke over the East Bay, Valerie found herself wondering why winning this wager had become so important. Ezra's project that day involved photographing residents whose apartment complex had been experiencing contaminated water for months. The property management company had been installing temporary filters rather than addressing the underlying infrastructure problems. Ms. Diaz has lived here for 30 years, Ezra explained, introducing Valerie to an elderly woman who graciously invited them into her small apartment. She's been buying bottled water since February. Valerie watched as Ezra worked, not just taking photographs, but listening to stories, showing residents their images, asking permission before capturing each frame. There was no efficiency to his process, nothing that could be optimized or streamlined. You could document 3 times as many subjects if you moved faster, she observed during a break. This isn't about quantity, he replied. It's about honoring people's experiences. Their stories matter more than my portfolio. By mid-afternoon, Valerie had abandoned her designer blazer in the car and was helping residents carry water jugs up flights of stairs. Her hands, more accustomed to touchscreens than physical labor, developed blisters. "Why are you doing this?" she asked Ezra as they shared a simple lunch from a neighborhood taqueria. "Your photographs are powerful, but they can't fix systemic problems." "No single action can," he agreed. "But last year, photos from a similar project helped secure a class action settlement. The month before, they convinced a councilwoman to propose new inspection regulations." "You're measuring impact," Valerie realized, "just not in dollars." Ezra handed her his camera. "Look." The display showed an image of Valerie herself, captured earlier, hair slightly disheveled, helping an elderly man with his groceries. Her expression contained something she rarely saw in the mirror: unguarded humanity. That night, Valerie couldn't sleep. Her penthouse felt eerily quiet compared to the vibrant community she'd experienced. She pulled up the golden calculation on her laptop, thousands of lines of code representing her understanding of human behavior. For the first time, it seemed hollow. The next morning, she arrived at Prism Ventures earlier than usual. Richard found her surrounded by research on community investment models. "Making progress on our bet?" he asked. "I'm exploring alternative metrics for social return on investment," she replied without looking up. Richard studied her. "You know, when I suggested this wager, I never expected you'd be the one to change." "I'm not changing," she insisted. "I'm expanding my data set." But later that week, when a potential client casually dismissed environmental concerns as marketing problems, Valerie found herself unexpectedly defensive. "Environmental degradation affects investment stability across all sectors," she argued, pulling up projection models that she'd previously ignored. "Sustainable practices aren't just ethical, they're economically sound." The client signed, impressed by her holistic approach. Afterward, Valerie texted Ezra a photo of the sustainability clause she'd added to the contract. His response was simple: "Influence where you stand. That's how change happens." For the first time in her career, Valerie felt something her algorithm had never accounted for: the satisfaction of aligning actions with values, regardless of immediate profit. It wasn't logical, it wasn't optimized, and yet somehow it computed. The unexpected variable. "I'm amending our bet," Richard announced, setting a folder on Valerie's desk. They were alone in the office, the skyline glittering through the windows as evening settled over San Francisco. Valerie looked up from her analysis of sustainable investment opportunities. "You can't change terms mid-wager." "I'm not changing, I'm raising the stakes." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Prism is being courted for acquisition by Meridian Global. The board's divided and your vote will be decisive." Valerie stiffened. Meridian was notorious for gutting companies and maximizing short-term returns at any cost. "What does this have to do with Ezra?" "If you win our bet, I'll vote with you against the acquisition. If you lose," Richard shrugged. "I've already signaled my support to Meridian's CEO." The implication was clear. Prism's future, her vision for the company, now hinged on getting Ezra to compromise his principles. "That's manipulation," she said quietly. "That's business," Richard countered. "Besides, I thought you believed everyone has a price. Prove it with Ezra Williams, or watch your company transform into everything you're suddenly pretending to stand against." After Richard left, Valerie stared at her reflection in the darkened window. 6 weeks ago, she would have seen this as a simple equation: one photographer's principles versus her life's work. Now the variables refused to align. Meanwhile, across the bay, Ezra faced his own dilemma. The email had arrived that morning from the International Climate Coalition, an opportunity to lead their visual documentation program. Global reach for his environmental message, stable funding, influential connections, everything he'd worked toward. There was just one condition. The coalition required him to remove his controversial Photo Voices series, portraits of oil executives juxtaposed with communities affected by extraction. The series had drawn legal threats from powerful corporations who funded several coalition partners. "They want me to take down the truth to speak partial truths," he told his assistant, Josephine. "You've turned down bigger compromises," she reminded him. "But never with so much potential impact at stake," Ezra replied, staring at his wall of photographs, faces of people whose stories he'd promised to tell. The next day, Valerie arrived at Ezra's studio unannounced, a new contract in hand. This one was perfect. a documentary series for an independent foundation with impeccable environmental credentials, offering creative control and substantial funding. It was also carefully designed as Ezra's dream opportunity, the culmination of her research into what would genuinely tempt him. If he accepted, she would win the bet with Richard and save Prism from Meridian's clutches. "Why are you really here, Valerie?" Ezra asked after reviewing the seemingly perfect offer. The practiced pitch died on her lips. Instead, she heard herself say, "Because I need to know if I've been right all along, that principles are just luxury beliefs people abandon when the stakes get high enough. And if you're wrong?" he asked softly. "Then everything I've built my success on is flawed," she admitted, "and I don't know who that makes me." Beyond algorithms, the following week unfolded like a complex equation with too many variables. Valerie immersed herself in Prism's financial records, searching for a way to block Meridian's acquisition without winning her bet with Richard. Meanwhile, Ezra sat in his darkened studio each night, the coalition's contract unsigned on his desk, wondering why compromising suddenly felt impossible when the potential impact was so great. They hadn't spoken since their last encounter, both wrestling with decisions that would redefine their paths. On Wednesday morning, Valerie called an emergency board meeting at Prism Ventures. "I've been operating under a flawed model," she began, facing skeptical executives. "Our golden calculation predicts behavior based on material incentives, but it systematically undervalues principle-based decision-making." She presented a revised investment framework incorporating environmental impact, community benefit, and long-term sustainability alongside traditional metrics. "This isn't charity," she emphasized. "It's recognizing that human systems, including markets, are more complex than our current algorithms account for. Meridian's offer represents an outdated paradigm of success." Richard watched her with narrowed eyes. "What about our wager?" "I concede," Valerie said simply. "You were right. Not everyone has a price, at least not the kind I believed in." Later that afternoon, as she cleared out her office, the board having narrowly voted to accept Meridian's offer despite her arguments, Ezra appeared in her doorway. "Josephine showed me the news," he said. "I'm sorry about your company." Valerie carefully wrapped her awards in tissue paper. "I'm not. For the first time, my actions align with my values. It's strangely liberating." "I declined the coalition position," Ezra revealed. "They wanted me to remove work that matters, stories that need telling." "Even though it meant larger impact for your cause?" "Impact built on compromise eventually crumbles," he replied. "But that doesn't mean we can't evolve." He placed a prospectus on her desk. "Some investors approached me about creating a media fund for environmental documentation. We need someone who understands both worlds." Valerie studied the document, then looked up with newfound clarity. "You know, my algorithm was designed to predict what people would sacrifice for gain. I never programmed it to recognize what they wouldn't sacrifice or why." "Some values defy calculation," Ezra said, "but that doesn't make them less quantifiable in impact." 3 months later, their Authentic Impact Fund launched with backing from former Prism clients, disillusioned with Meridian's management. Richard surprisingly became their first investor after Meridian dismantled his social impact initiatives. "I underestimated the market value of integrity," he admitted at the launch event. That evening, Valerie and Ezra stood on a balcony overlooking the bay, watching the sunset paint the water in gradients no algorithm could fully capture. "Was it worth it?" he asked. "Trading certainty for possibility?" Valerie considered the question. She no longer predicted human behavior with unwavering confidence. Her new models embraced complexity, contradiction, and the stubborn persistence of values that couldn't be bought or sold. "I used to believe everything had a price," she replied. "Now I understand that some things have value precisely because they're not for sale." Between them, the evening light illuminated new equations, not of price, but of worth, written in the language of choices that defied simple calculation. In losing her bet, Valerie had gained a more authentic algorithm for living. And in standing firm, Ezra had discovered that principles, when shared, could multiply rather than divide. Some variables, they both realized, weren't meant to be solved, only experienced.